Welcome to the post-lunch session of TICON 2020, Day 2. I'm Thangam Joseph, Charter Member, TI Kerala. Our next keynote session is on tourism, an area where Kerala has shown amazing growth and potential. The anchor of this session is Mr. Dominic, co-founder of CGH Group Earth and a charter member and past president of TI Kerala. Over to you, Mr. Jose.
Thank you, Thangam. Welcome, my co-panelists. Again, we are now at another TICON 2020. Well, the times has forced us to make it a virtual TICON. Anyway, the subject that we have today, I think, is an extraordinary subject of journey to God's own country. Kerala, you say the word Kerala anywhere in India or anywhere in the world, the reaction people will get, oh, God's own country. And that's a remarkable achievement or remarkable branding exercise that they have been conducted. God's own country, a journey to. I recall, my entry into Kerala tourism goes back to the mid-70s. That's before God's own country. And I recall at those times, we were considered to be a Bimaru state, the Hindi word Bimaru state, as far as tourism is concerned. From there has been a miraculous growth, thanks to many factors. The primary factor, I think, that happened in Kerala was the what I would call it the issues which post-independence times, the issue that the turbulence in Kerala, as a result of which, primarily probably trade unionism kept Kerala green. One factor. Another factor is investments in healthcare, education, and institutional democracy raised the Kerala bar as far, and then the dividend of all that was tourism. It was the mid-90s or early 90s when tourism began to be of any reckoning, gain traction. Kerala had alternating left and left of left governments, for whom tourism is invariably was considered to be an embarrassment most times, being capitalist, luxury, and even bourgeois. In that context, it was a miracle that tourism could grow. And thanks to what I would call the dividend of the high human development index that Kerala had. It is there that from there on, we move to the high, the factor of saying that Kerala's journey to God's own country. What I would say, what I would think is that happened. I remember in the early days, bureaucrats, many of them are now nationally and globally achieved fame, who came in the tourism department. In the old days, bureaucrats out of favor would get that post. And in the coalition governments Kerala had, the weaker coalition partner would get this portfolio. All that has changed. Now tourism is considered to be Kerala's most successful sector, successful industry. Now we are now going to examine, and we've got a group of people who will talk about it, and I would say that an eclectic group who have been part of this journey from the earliest times to the times in which Kerala went into being Bimaru to among the best performing states in the country. But we took a different direction. Let me just, in the time available, let me just try and be what direction we took. One is that foreign direct investment was scared to come to Kerala for various reasons. The perception of rent, all those. As a consequence, sensing the opportunity that tourism was throwing up, small local entrepreneurs did what they could, which is small, in a manner which they knew, which is local. So indigenous and small was a feature was Kerala development. And that indigenous and small could become world-class is a Kerala story. And that, I think, is a remarkable story, which in this session, we will try and explore the story through the actions and words and experiences of the panelists here. We have in the panel, I think, an eclectic group, as I mentioned. We've got one, I think, he's George Muthoot, who's the managing director of Xandari Resorts. Not only is he a pioneer, he comes from his background says he comes from, of course, from the most famous Muthoot House. His leisure and hospitality division he heads. He has an MBA from France. Marketing and business is his forte. In hospitality, the Muthoot Group have several projects in Kerala. I think the first of them was in Taikadi's Cardamom County, and then going on to several other houseboats, and then in Cochin too. But most interestingly, and I think in the context of our discussion, George also has not only invested in South India and Kerala, and he's an entrepreneur even far away, South America. I will be interested to know, see him make a comparison between being in business in Kerala and South America. And in the common factor between Kerala and Costa Rica is that both aspire to be global leaders in responsible tourism, or ecotourism, as it used to be called. We also have, as a speaker, we have Karthik Davi. And Karthik Davi comes from Karnataka. He's from Bandipur. He runs his background is that he's an entrepreneur, and with a strong liking for the what I would call the Dhole. Dhole, I think that is the correct pronunciation of that. And he set up in Bandipur tourism enterprise. So I would like Karthik to talk about how he's a neighbor to Kerala, and how he's, I think, well versed in what's happening in Kerala. At the same time, protected area in Karnataka and in Kerala, and how customers perceive the two destinations, and how that growth story will complement the Kerala growth story. We have next a speaker, I think very, very famous traveler, probably the most famous traveler whose enterprise has been built on travel. We have none other than Santhosh George Kulangara, founder and managing director of Safari TV. I'm sure everybody, and watching Safari TV is the best way to travel, especially in these times when travel has now become more and more difficult. Santhosh his participation in this will talk about his wide and vast knowledge and experience, and about the happenings in these countries which he has visited, and he himself has established spaces in tourism in Kerala, and we will see how his view of the growth of Kerala towards God's own country. We have let me also just take a few minutes to talk about the enterprise which Sangam said I am a co-founder of, which is CGH Earth. It began as I myself came to Kerala in 1978. Before that, I used to be a chartered accountant. Subsequently, came here. Literally pulled my father, and I told myself, I'll come here for 2 years, and when my younger brothers are joining me, I will go back to my chosen profession. 40 years later, I'm still here, and it's a remarkable journey of I can see I've been witness to from the 70s till 2018. The most significant part of it is, as I said before, from a Bimaru state to become the best performing state. Now, in the context of the current calamities that we had, I think Of late, in the last few years, we have been several calamities have befallen us, and how tourism has overcome many of them. The first calamity, which particularly tourism, was in the last UDF government, on account of a quarrel between the chief minister and the party president. The excise policy was announced, which said that only 5 stars in tourism, 5 stars will permit bars in Kerala. As a consequence of which, we had a big hit. Mice went out of Kerala. Travelers could not understand how this policy could be. But to the credit of the government, the next government reversed all that, and we could quickly see a revival. But 2018, we had the big flood, a calamity of global proportion. And then then in between there was a Nipah. And in 2019, the big flood was said to be a 1 in 100-year experience, event. But just the next year, that was repeated again. So, but the point I'm trying to emphasize here is that in 2019, October, November, December, and January 2020, that is when the Department of Tourism announced figures for Kerala, which happened to be the best and the best numbers in our history in terms of arrivals and occupancy. So with all that calamity that we had preceded us, we had a huge spring back. Let us hope now we are in the biggest calamity of them all, as far as tourism is concerned. Not just that we got a hit, we literally has fallen off the cliff. It all become to zero. It represents for Kerala, I believe, in this journey. Our topic today, to journey to God's own country, how God's own country, which has performed so brilliantly, is going to tackle this current event, and what will be. I think there's another track is going to discuss that. What is going to be the new dawn after post-COVID? With these words of introduction, let me now go to my first speaker, which will be Karthik. I think the formality that we would follow is that if you can keep yourself to about 10, 12 minutes, and then we'll go on to each of the speakers, and we'll have a little time for some discussion. I'm sure there'll be question and answer. We can have a discussion on the subject that has been raised. And I'm told that our end time has even slightly been pushed to be extended a little bit, and we'll see as we go along. And now can I ask Karthik, the owner of Dhole's, I don't know how to pronounce it, Dhole or Dhole? Dhole's Den in Bandipur. Yes, Karthik.
Thanks, Josh. That was rightly pronounced. Dhole's Den. It's named after the Indian wild dog. Okay. And just to give a short brief about myself, I come from the travel background, having been a tour operator for more than 20 years. And my experiences in life have been, varied in the sense. The biggest one was my accident where I lost my arm. Okay. Now that has formed whatever I perceive very strongly and how I react to things. Okay. And one very important thing there is I don't like to compromise. I just abhor the word compromise. Okay, so that, and then various other things and experiences that I've had while traveling through the world, in Africa, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu and Zambia, all sorts of different places. Okay, so I picked up a lot of interesting things, and my learning curve had Kerala rightly placed there, because that was one of the first one that I saw, which was like a shining star at that time. Okay, maybe today some places look different, but those days that's the way I could see it, saying like, okay, people were doing something very different. Okay, something which was unique, and something that had to be pushed to the client who visits this wonderful land. Okay, now that being said, I always put, from the tourism perspective, I put the customer or the guest in the middle of things. Okay, and you weave a product around his requirement. Okay, but that being said, again, we don't try and lose sight of the ecosystem, because the ecosystem, as as it is. We don't build Taj Mahals. We just take people there, right? So these things are existing. This protected areas, these beautiful green spaces, they are not of our creation. So its idea is to maintain that for the further generations, and the guest has to have an enjoyable experience without destroying it. Okay. So in the year 2004, at that time still as a tour operator, we stopped giving elephant rides to people in Jaipur, which is now only people last 2 3 years have done it. We went out and said it's for the animals and we just won't do it. Okay. Now that that's kicked off the thing in my mind, saying like, what are the things that are important? Then I started looking, and many times I looked at even your enterprise, what you were doing at Spice Village, and even had the most enjoyable experience that I had on a houseboat was owned by Muthoot Enterprise, and that kept me going, thinking like, okay, what will it be that the customer should be enjoying as a responsible traveler without destroying? So that moved me to at some time come to Bandipur, because I was fascinated by this landscape here, and start a tourism enterprise. But in the beginning itself, I had defined what I want to do. I didn't want a huge enterprise coming in. I wanted it to be small. Okay, so I actually had a ringside view of all that was happening in Kerala, in the world, in Africa, and every other place. I was actually visiting it and taking inspirations from there. Okay, so finally, what I ended up starting it with just 5 rooms. Okay, bringing it down to the bare minimum what the guest would require, to call it luxury of a different kind. In a sense, like, I believed that people living in the cities want the luxury of space, want the luxury of service, want the luxury of living in a beautiful environment without destroying it. So, and we ended up taking them as partners. Our own guests, we defined them such a way that we tell them, well, this is the way to live, otherwise this place would not survive. And that's what we have done since our inception. And because that was done in the pre-COVID times itself, the moment the COVID scene scenario has hit us also, just like it does hit everybody. Okay, the only way we could do was keep believing and trying to perform exactly the same duty as we did before. So when you have defined your goal of providing great accommodation but still being responsible, then the same people keep coming back. So that's what we have seen till now, and that's what has worked for us. So during the COVID time, of course, it was a very difficult time, and then there was for 5 months we were closed completely. What we did was we got prepared. So whenever I say preparation is the start, so you need to prepare yourself very well before you do anything. So it was like we ended up cleaning the place, keeping it ready for the day to go. When the moment the word go was uttered to us, saying like, okay, you can open now. Okay, we were open with our staff, and to my surprise, my small enterprise here with just under 20 people was opened the very next day. Unlike many others who had to wait for another 15 days, 20 days, because we had invested in people. We didn't send them back. We were here, and then we assured them that you're going to be partners in what we have done. So that's what we did. Now we know that in this COVID times, the outbound, even the inbound, nothing is really going to work at the moment. I don't see, as a travel professional, anything coming till October. So the only thing that we have now is, which is going to make us survive, is going to be this small amount of domestic tourism, which can grow to help us, go through this very troubled times. Now, that being said, the potential of tourism in India is enormous. See, many times people have like always gone to Thailand or Bali or in every place. Now we'll have to somehow put it across to the guests in India that there are wonderful spaces here, wonderful places which you have not even experienced, and you can very well visit it with great safety measures. So it also means that we get across the message that safety measures are there, but you are being living you are when you are coming back in the after the major COVID crash that we've had, you're coming to a new space. You're coming to a space where you also have been affected, but you come back to a very new place in such that, you know, it's a new dawn, even for you, the way you have lived, the way you have traveled. So it also means, like, when we tell them, well, this is not going to be there, but that they understand that this is the way things work in a wilderness. That's where we are, because we are in a protected area somewhere. Okay, so that getting that message across is the biggest thing. Now let me uh, imagine, you know, how do we tourism potential alive in this very crazy scenario. We'll have to make sure that the product that we have is not just unique, but also, you know, it's not masked somewhere. Okay, and our experience in that has been in the years. That's exactly the thing, because the moment it becomes mass, the moment you have like 100 rooms or 200 rooms, like say in Goa or in beaches of Sri Lanka, you end up with a huge horde of people coming there every now and then. And it just, you know, the city moves over the weekend to a different destination. It doesn't change anything. Okay, so that's exactly that we want, that the protected areas and spaces. uh, my dogs, sorry.
Oh, I was about to ask, is that
These are my dogs, sorry.
the brand symbol?
Excuse me.
Karthik, what we'll do, we'll come back when, so
Sorry. Sorry for the break. My dogs here are not used to see me talking for a long time. Okay, now the other factor is, how do you make sure that your guests in a way sympathize with the way you are. Okay, so the factor here is, like, you know, sympathy, not in the sense like, okay, after a big earthquake or for a flood, for that matter. Okay, how do they identify with you? Okay, so what we have done, and I can tell from my last 10 years experience, I've tried to um, I've tried to share our story with the guests. You can hear me?
yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so what I've done the last 10 years is I've tried to share the story of those den with the guests. Okay, the underlying factor, and everybody is actually asking it, many of the campfires that we have here, is like, how did the whole thing start? So then I have to tell them, like, we took a very barren piece of land, have converted it into a very beautiful landscape by saving water, using, and then that actually comes on to them when they understand, okay, how do you use solar panels, how do these things work, how do these things happen in a tourism enterprise. Okay, and that, um, at the end we tell them, see, you've had a wonderful holiday, but your footprint is so very small. Now that really somewhere amazes them, that is it possible to live on such a small footprint? Like, so for example, when I tell my guests, it sometimes amazes them when I tell them, well, you have been using just 40 watts of power in your whole room. It's because of the construction that we have done. It's because of the kind of lighting that we do. It really saves on energy, and that you don't really use the resources which are just provided by burning fossil fuel. now with that being said, we have to, as tourism enterprise, also include things like, you know, telling our guests what is the real price of say washing a bath towel, or um, um, what does a cup of tea cost? It's not 10 rupees. It's much more than that. Okay. So now how do you put it across to a client? Okay. The more that we do is only by practicing. We can preach, we can write big letters and all that. But at the end of it, it's how we live here, how a lifestyle is being portrayed to them. Now that gets us closer to explaining them that a tourism of a different kind is possible.
Karthik, let me just, we'll come back to you. You raised a very interesting point. We'll come back to it in our discussion. And
Sure.
in the context of our subject being the journey to God's own country, how your journey has somehow impacted or gained from God's own country and vice versa.
Yes.
The protected areas of Karnataka and neighboring areas, how it happened, what happened in Kerala too. Now I'm just going to,
Exactly.
I'm sorry to rush you a bit, but we'll come back. We've got time to, there's some points that come about from your discussion. Next speaker I would like to bring is George Muthoot George from the House of Muthoot. Probably the biggest enterprise in Kerala, if I'm not mistaken. But he heads the hospitality division, and he's a management professional, and he has some number of resorts in Kerala. So I will just like to let us hear from George and Muthoot, their journey and how it synchronizes, resonates with the Kerala journey. So Muthoot, George, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jose Dominic. I think, introductions like this kind of embarrass me a little bit as well. Saying that, coming from the House of Muthoot and all of that. In my case, it's actually quite irrelevant, because the way I look at it is my journey was something that I started with passion, because I grew up in Delhi. And for me, our holidays were spent coming to Kerala in the late 70s, early 80s, and through the 90s as well. So coming to Kerala in those days, I still remember how I absolutely fell in love with this place because of what Kerala had to offer. And I always said that why something like tourism has not picked up in Kerala the way it should have. And then this constant, thing that I didn't look at it as tourism in those days, because I was still young to actually coin a term for it. I always said there was this magic about this place that I felt that others should also experience. And with that in mind, I still remember when I finished schooling in Delhi, I got admission into St. Stephen's College. And I absolutely refused to go to St. Stephen's College. And I fought with my father saying that I wanted to go and do hotel management in Manipal at the Welcome Group Graduate School of Hotel Administration. And he was pretty upset with me, saying that, why would you want to go and become a waiter? Because I'm coming from a family of bankers, right? So that the way they would think of it is about banking and finance, and you do eco honors in St. Stephen's College, and that's the right way forward. To cut a long story short, I had my way, of course, and I finally went and did hotel management, and I pursued that by working with other hotel chains, and then finally went for my master's as well in hospitality management. And then I finally landed up in Kerala in 2002 to start my own enterprise, at least part of the family enterprise as well, to get into hospitality, and which is now presently called Xandari Resort. So in a nutshell, I'm just giving you the story of what made me really drive myself towards this enterprise called hospitality and tourism, and what brought me here. But the idea was not to start something because you wanted to enter a space. My idea was to enter a space to make a difference in terms of how this would actually impact society and communities at large. And that was more important for me than just building a hotel, building rooms, and saying that we are part of ecotourism or responsible tourism. There's much more. So we built it on three principles of the three C's. One is community-based tourism, collaboration-based tourism, and conservation-based tourism. So these were the three on which we actually built Xandari Resorts. But interestingly, you had and the potential that we have here. And you have said enough of what has happened in Kerala and how things have actually progressed, how God's own country became a super brand, how large scale hospitality companies like the Marriotts or the Hiltons or have were not the ones who actually spearheaded the movement in Kerala. And that made it so lovely, because it were local entrepreneurs who actually jumped in and said, we will be able to showcase our culture better than anybody else. And I thought that was such a unique moment of Kerala or Kerala enterprise to actually start something like that. And hospitality it takes a different meaning altogether. So one of the reasons why Costa Rica was very interesting for me as well was because, apart from being in Central America, part of Latin America, Costa Rica is, I believe, one of the countries that actually coined the term ecotourism in the world. And they invented responsible tourism, if you might call it that. And as it went forward, they are still progressing and becoming very, very proactive as far as tourism is concerned. And it is the #1 enterprise in Costa Rica even today. But let me give you a few stats about Costa Rica and what makes it so special. One of the facts is that Costa Rica, in terms of its absolute beauty of the rainforest, the mountains and the beaches, very much resembles Kerala. But the land mass of Costa Rica is 1.5 times the size of Kerala. But they have a population of only 5 million people. And that has been a huge advantage for them. There are countries that have similar statistics, but it could end up being on the wrong side of the fence. But Costa Rica took a very, very early stance, a vision that the government had, that to preserve all of this natural wealth would be where Costa Rica's future actually lay. Even though it was primarily an agrarian society, and even today they have large-scale coffee exports and banana export, tourism has become the #1 factor in Costa Rica. Today, Costa Rica depends on 100% renewable energy, by the way, the entire country. The entire country, it's a demilitarized country. Since 1948, they've not had an army. And just recently, I was on a Zoom conference with the Costa Rican ambassador and also the Indian ambassador, talking about how to improve relationships between Costa Rica and India. And we were also on that day celebrating 199 years of democracy in Costa Rica. So it is one of the most stable countries that you would actually see in Central America. And that democracy has obviously given out a lot of benefits. In terms of their way of looking at tourism, and again, the interesting part is the similarity is it was again small entrepreneurs who actually spearheaded the tourism movement in Costa Rica as well. Very similar to India, with just one primary difference. Costa Ricans in those times were primarily an agrarian society, so their concept of tourism was not up to scratch in terms of the international standards. So the people who actually started this were actually Americans and Europeans who had actually settled in Costa Rica. They invested money in the country and they brought about this change. And they brought and spearheaded tourism in Costa Rica. So if you see the lodging facilities and all other activities that are related to tourism in Costa Rica, that impetus led to this amazing climb in how Costa Rica became the #1 destination for ecotourism. Even today, when I look at it, they have, the unfortunate part is in India, a lot of our hospitality is presently being judged, and I'm being a bit critical here, by ratings like 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star. I think these are all very archaic ways of measuring what we are talking about in terms of responsible tourism or sustainability, because none of these ratings address any of that. And I fail to understand why we're still following these archaic methodologies to actually rank hotels. Whereas in Costa Rica, they use a very, very strict guideline on sustainable tourism. And it's based on these guidelines, and I've been through it, and it's very tough to get to each and every factor, but I think it is so important to do so. And I love the fact that they actually have that to ensure that they don't believe in 1 star, 2 star, or 5 star. They have their own ranking system, which is completely based on sustainability and sustainable practices, which lead to, of course, responsible tourism. And it's on that basis they do it. And I think we should also change that. I think the way forward is when you look at what has happened this year in terms of COVID and how it has affected almost every industry that is out there, hospitality in particular. The one thing that the present government is doing in various sectors is something that I think we should also look at as far as tourism in Kerala is concerned. The #1 thing the government doing right now, if you've noticed it, it's all in the news, is reforms in every sector. whether it's the agricultural sector, whether it's the educational sector, whether it's labor reforms. There are a lot of reforms coming in. And if you ask me, these reforms have been due for a long time in this country. Since 1991 was the last time we had these reforms. And now these fundamental reforms and changes are important for the country to move forward. In the same way, I think this pivotal year is the moment that people, all stakeholders in Kerala tourism, should also look at reforms that we need to bring about and not look at the past, but look at the future and say, this is how we want to change, and have a vision for how we want to bring tourism. There are so many things we can talk about. But most importantly, I would say we need to start thinking of bringing all stakeholders on board. Costa Rica tourism does not work by itself. It actually involves all stakeholders. Whether you're from the agricultural sector, whether you're from the manufacturing sector, you ask any Costa Rican today, they are all part of the tourism, and they're all part of responsible tourism in Costa Rica. Birds that I could ever name in a lifetime. And this is part of their education and their curriculum. And I feel these are the kind of changes when I say that Kerala should now take the next step forward and truly making it God's own country, and saying we should have a think tank. We should bring about a think tank of people, not just from the tourism industry, but people from manufacturing, people from the media, people from the agricultural sector. We all have to come together and really say, does tourism only belong to the hospitality industry, or does it belong to each and every one of us? Are we not all stakeholders in it? And I think that is one of the greatest lessons that I've had from Costa Rica, and what Costa Rica has taught me in the sense that that's what I would like to see play out in my own home state, where I believe we can bring about these changes, even though we face with other challenges. Like we have a lesser landmass in Costa Rica. We have close to 33 million people staying in the state right now. So there's this constant challenge, but I think these challenges can be overcome if we work together from various industry, not just tourism and hospitality working in its own silo and saying, yes, this is the way we look at it. But I think it's time for everybody to be part of this. I think it's time for everybody to now talk about what is the next way forward. Another interesting part that I want to talk about Costa Rica again, and I'm sorry if I'm harping about Costa Rica a lot, but I'm just trying to say that there is so much that we can learn, and we learn from each other, and that's how we progress in life. So another important thing that I remember from Costa Rica is the government has this beautiful program called Essential Costa Rica. What they do is they take enterprises, whether you're manufacturing, services, agri, hospitality, whatever you want to say, they look at various players in each industry. And within that, based on certain criterias of what they judge as being, is your company holding the ideals of Costa Rica correctly? Is the ethos right? Are you ethically right as a company? Are you providing a lot of things like local employment, all of these things? When you get into those factors, you get a recognition from the government called you're part of Essential Costa Rica. It's a tag that they give you. What does that tag mean? That tag means that your company, your organization is a flag bearer of that country. That means if anybody wants to do business in Costa Rica and comes to your company and starts working with you, if you're tagged Essential Costa Rica, that is like a stamp of approval given by the government saying this company, apart from the business that it engages in, speaks of all the values that Costa Rica and Costa Ricans stand for. And I think that is a fantastic idea. If you were to reward local entrepreneurs in Kerala for what they're doing here, we should have an Essential Kerala program, if you really ask me, and to say of all the good that has been done in this state, we should have such companies being beautifully recognized by the government to say, essentially, they represent Kerala, they represent the culture of Kerala, they represent the ethos of Kerala, and they represent Kerala in a holistic manner. So I think that is very important. And this is what I feel are my greatest, I could go on and on because of the paucity of time, I'm going to cut it short, but I could go on and on about the wonders that I have seen in Costa Rica and how all of this comes beautifully together. And when you visit that country, you really understand that every single individual, almost every single tree in that country speaks about that beautiful hospitality and responsibility that they have to preserve this beautiful natural wealth that is there. And I think that is something that we have a lot to learn from. Today, unfortunately, I can also say something before I close my talk. I'd like to also point out one of the stark facts of Kerala is the fact that if you just look at the hospitality industry, there are very little entry barriers into the hospitality industry. So people who have money have invested into it, but not with the right motivations. Let me put it this way. There has been unbridled development in Kerala, which I think is going without a plan. It is going with no consideration for the environment. And I think it is largely being done by people from Kerala. And I believe this needs to be encompassed in a vision for Kerala into the future. And if the hospitality industry can be open enough to welcome other industries into this think tank, I believe we can have a much better future in terms of what Kerala stands for and what we represent. Thank you.
Thank you, George. You raised some very interesting, and the context, what I'm saying is that at the moment, there is a discussion, and I think there's a draft regulation called the Tourism Regulation Act, which is about to become statute very soon. But some point that you raised here, I think will be very interesting learning for regulation makers in Kerala. Thank you. As you're speaking, one curiosity I asked, what is Xandari? Is it a Costa Rican word, a Spanish word? What does it mean?
Actually, it has no meaning. It was done in Costa Rica. It's basically the person who coined it signified this as when you are, when you find that yourself in that moment in nature and moment in time, when you feel that moment of exhilaration where you're part of nature and you're like in harmony with it, and you have goosebumps because you are in harmony with it. That moment you feel of that moment of euphoria. He called it Xandari. That's what we call Xandari.
Thank you. That fulfills my curiosity. I was wondering what's the name of a bird or a fish.
No.
All right. Now we have our next speaker, and I think he needs, of course, no introduction. Everybody who's on Sapphire watching his journeys, Santhosh George Kulangara, his journeys across the world, his journeys and the learnings that he has put together, his observations and his commentary, narration with behind the camera. I think extremely interesting, and it'll be very interesting to see how he views the Kerala journey from Bimaru to God's own country. Now, of course, in COVID times, from not necessarily from behind the camera, but in front of the camera this time. And please let us compare it and be as candid as you are when you speak on television. We have time for another 10-12 minutes.
Thank you, Josh Dominic, sir. എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. ഞാൻ സംസാരിക്കുന്ന ഭാഷ എന്നെ കേൾക്കുന്ന ആളുകൾക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവുന്നുണ്ടെന്ന് ഞാൻ കരുതുന്നു. കാരണം ഞാനൊരു മലയാളം മാധ്യമ പ്രവർത്തകനാണ്. ഞാൻ ഹോട്ടൽ ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയുടെയോ ഹോസ്പിറ്റാലിറ്റി ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയുടെയോ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് അറിയപ്പെടുന്ന ആളുമല്ല. എൻ്റെ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ, യാത്രകളൊക്കെ മലയാളത്തിൽ മലയാളികളോട് സംസാരിച്ച ശീലത്തിലാണ് ഞാനിപ്പോൾ നിങ്ങളുടെ മുമ്പിൽ നിൽക്കുന്നത്. ടൂറിസത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് ഞാൻ യാത്രകൾ ആരംഭിക്കുന്ന കാലത്തുണ്ടായിരുന്ന എൻ്റെ വീക്ഷണമാകെ ഈ 2020 എത്തിയപ്പോഴേക്കും മാറിയിട്ടുണ്ട് എന്ന് നിസ്സംശയം പറയാൻ കഴിയും. ടൂറിസം വലിയൊരു ട്രാൻസ്ഫോർമേഷന് വിധേയമായിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ് ഇപ്പോൾ. നമ്മുടെ പരമ്പരാഗത മാധ്യമങ്ങളും സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയയും തമ്മിലുള്ള വ്യത്യാസം പോലെ പരമ്പരാഗത ടൂറിസവും പുതിയ കാല ടൂറിസവും വലിയ ഒരു അന്തരത്തിന്, വലിയൊരു വിപ്ലവത്തിന് വിധേയമായിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. അതിലേറ്റവും പ്രധാന ചാലക ശക്തിയായി മാറിയിരിക്കുന്നത്, നമ്മുടെ ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയിലുള്ള ആളുകൾ എത്ര പേര് നിരീക്ഷിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടെന്നറിയില്ല, സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയ തന്നെയാണ്. അതായത് ഇപ്പോൾ വളർന്നു വരുന്ന ഒരു തൊഴിൽ ലഭിച്ച് പുറത്തേക്ക് യാത്ര ചെയ്യണമെന്ന് ആഗ്രഹിച്ച് പുറത്തേക്ക് ഇറങ്ങുന്ന ചെറുപ്പക്കാരൊക്കെ യാത്ര ചെയ്യുന്ന രീതിയും കഴിഞ്ഞ തലമുറയിലെ യാത്രികർ യാത്ര ചെയ്തിരുന്ന രീതിയും തമ്മിൽ വലിയ അന്തരം രൂപപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നു എന്നർത്ഥം. ജോസ് ഡൊമിനിക് സാറൊക്കെ കേരളത്തിലെ ഒരു ടൂറിസം സംസ്കാരത്തിന് വിത്തുപാകുമ്പോൾ ഒരുതരം ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷണലൈസ്ഡ് ടൂറിസം ആയിരുന്നു പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും ഫോക്കസ് ചെയ്തിരുന്നത്. കേരളത്തില് ഞാൻ വളരെ ആദരവോടെ എപ്പോഴും സംസാരിക്കാറുള്ള ഒരു കാര്യമാണ് നിങ്ങളെപ്പോലുള്ള സംരംഭകരുടെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷൻസ്. പൈതൃകം, കേരളത്തിന്റെ ആർക്കിടെക്ചർ, കേരളത്തിന്റെ ആർട്ട് ഫോംസ്, കേരളത്തിന്റെ ക്യുസീൻ, കേരളത്തിന്റെ ലൈഫ് സ്റ്റൈൽ, ഈ 4 കാര്യങ്ങളെ സമ്മേളിപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഇതുവരെ കേരളത്തിലെ ടൂറിസത്തിന്റെ അടിസ്ഥാന ശിലകൾ പാകി. പക്ഷേ കേരളത്തില് നമുക്കറിയാം ഇത്രയേറെ ആത്മാർത്ഥമായി പ്രവർത്തിച്ച ടൂറിസത്തിന് വേണ്ടി അടിസ്ഥാന ഇട്ട ആളുകൾ പോലും പൊതുസമൂഹത്തിന് മുന്നിൽ, കേരളീയ സമൂഹത്തിന് മുന്നിൽ ആദരിക്കപ്പെടുന്നുണ്ടോ എന്നെനിക്ക് ബലമായ സംശയമുണ്ട്. റിസോർട്ട് മാഫിയ എന്നോ റിസോർട്ടുകളുടെ ഒരു അധോലോകം എന്നോ ഒക്കെ വിശേഷിപ്പിക്കപ്പെടാനാണ് പലപ്പോഴും ഈ സംരംഭകർക്ക് വിധി. പൊതുസമൂഹവും പൊതുമാധ്യമങ്ങളും ഞാനൊക്കെ ഉൾപ്പെടുന്ന മാധ്യമ സമൂഹവും ഒക്കെ ഈ അടുത്ത കാലം വരെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇപ്പോഴും ഒരു റിസർവേഷനോട് കൂടി തന്നെയാണ് റിസോർട്ടുകളെ, ഹോട്ടൽ ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയെ കാണുന്നത് എന്നത് എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണെന്ന് എനിക്ക് എത്ര ആലോചിച്ചിട്ട് മനസ്സിലാകുന്നില്ല. പക്ഷേ ലോകത്തിന്റെ ഒരു ഭാഗത്തും മറ്റൊരു രാജ്യത്തും അത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു ചിന്ത ഉണ്ടാവാറില്ല. അത് നമ്മുടെ പരമ്പരാഗതമായ തൊഴിൽ സംസ്കാരത്തിന്റെ, നമ്മുടെ ചില രാഷ്ട്രീയ നിരീക്ഷണങ്ങളുടെ ഒക്കെ പാരമ്പര്യത്തിൽ നിന്നുണ്ടായതാവാം. അതല്ലെങ്കിൽ പൊതുജനത്തിന്, സാമാന്യജനത്തിന് ടൂറിസത്തിൽ പറയത്തക്ക ഒന്നും ചെയ്യാനും നേടാനുമില്ല എന്ന ചിന്തയിൽ നിന്നുണ്ടായതുമാവാം. ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു തുടങ്ങിയ ആ വിഷയത്തിലേക്ക് തിരിച്ചു വരുമ്പോൾ പുതിയ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ ആ ചിത്രമാകെ മാറുകയാണ്. ലോകത്ത് എവിടെയും ആ മാറ്റം പ്രകടവുമാണ്. സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയയിലേക്ക് നിങ്ങൾ നോക്കിയാൽ ഇന്ന് ഏറ്റവും അധികം സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയ പ്രോഗ്രാമുകൾ, യൂട്യൂബേഴ്സ്, വ്ളോഗേഴ്സ് പ്രോഗ്രാമുകൾ ചെയ്യുന്നത് ട്രാവൽ വീഡിയോകളാണ്. 100 കണക്കിന് 1000 കണക്കിന് ചെറുപ്പക്കാർ ഇന്ന് ലോകത്തിന്റെ നാനാഭാഗത്ത് നിന്ന് ട്രാവൽ വീഡിയോസ് അപ്ലോഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നു യൂട്യൂബിൽ. ഇവരിൽ ആരും ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു റിസോർട്ടിൽ പോയി താമസിച്ചതിന്റെ വീഡിയോകളല്ല കൂടുതലും വരുന്നത്. പ്രകൃതിയിലേക്ക് ഇറങ്ങുന്ന, മനുഷ്യന്റെ ജീവിതത്തിലേക്ക് ഇറങ്ങുന്ന, മനുഷ്യന്റെ സംസ്കാരത്തിലേക്ക് ഇറങ്ങുന്ന, ദൈനംദിന ജീവിതത്തിലേക്ക് ഇറങ്ങി വ്യത്യസ്തതകളെ തേടി നടക്കുന്ന ആളുകളെയാണ് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. ഈ വീഡിയോകൾ കണ്ടു വളരുന്ന ലക്ഷക്കണക്കിന് കോടിക്കണക്കിന് വ്യൂവേഴ്സിലും ആ ഒരു സംസ്കാരമാണ് വളരുന്നത്. 5 സ്റ്റാർ ഹോട്ടലുകളിൽ പോയി താമസിക്കുക എന്ന ഒരു സംസ്കാരത്തിനപ്പുറം മനുഷ്യരുടെ ജീവിതത്തെ അടുത്തറിയാനുള്ള, അവരുടെ ഗ്രാമങ്ങളിലേക്ക് പോകാനുള്ള, മുക്കുവ ഗ്രാമങ്ങളിലേക്കും കുടിയേറ്റ ഗ്രാമങ്ങളിലേക്കും മലയോര ഗ്രാമങ്ങളിലേക്കും ആദിവാസി ഗ്രാമങ്ങളിലേക്കും പോയി ആ സംസ്കാരത്തെ അടുത്തറിയുകയും അവരോടൊപ്പം ജീവിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു പുതിയ കാല ടൂറിസം ലോകം മുഴുവൻ രൂപം കൊണ്ടുവന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഈ കഴിഞ്ഞ 2 വർഷങ്ങളുണ്ടായ മാറ്റമാണത്. ഇപ്പോ ഈ കോവിഡ് കാലം കഴിഞ്ഞ് ടൂറിസം പുനരാരംഭിക്കുമ്പോൾ അതിന്റെ വലിയൊരു വളർച്ച ഉണ്ടാകാൻ പോവുകയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ കേരളം ഏതൊക്കെ കാര്യങ്ങളിലായിരിക്കണം ഗോഡ്സ് ഓൺ കൺട്രി എന്ന അതിന്റെ അഭിമാന വാചകം ഉയർത്തിപ്പിടിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഇനി അടുത്ത കാലഘട്ടത്തിലേക്ക് നമ്മൾ നടന്നെടുക്കേണ്ടത്? തീർച്ചയായും ഈ 2 മേഖലകളിലേക്ക് നമ്മൾ ഉറച്ചു ചിന്തിക്കുക തന്നെ വേണം. ഒന്ന് ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷണൽ ടൂറിസവും, 2 കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ബേസ്ഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ടൂറിസവും. 2ലും തീർച്ചയായും കേരളത്തിന്റെ സാംസ്കാരിക പൈതൃകത്തെ, കേരളത്തിൽ മാത്രം ലോകത്തിന്റെ മറ്റൊരു മേഖലയിൽ ലഭിക്കാത്ത കാഴ്ചകളെയും അനുഭവങ്ങളെയും രുചികളെയും അവതരിപ്പിക്കാൻ കഴിഞ്ഞെങ്കിൽ മാത്രമേ കേരളത്തിന് കൂടുതലായി വളരാൻ കഴിയൂ എന്ന് ഞാൻ ഉറച്ചു വിശ്വസിക്കുന്നു. കാരണം ശ്രീലങ്കയിൽ ലഭിക്കാത്ത എന്താണ് കേരളത്തിൽ ലഭിക്കുന്നത് എന്നൊരു ചോദ്യം എൻ്റെ മുന്നിലുണ്ട്. ഞാൻ ഈ ലോകയാത്രകളിലൂടെ സഞ്ചരിക്കുമ്പോൾ തിരിച്ച് കേരളത്തിൽ വന്ന് എന്നോട് അത്ഭുതത്തോടെ കേരളത്തെക്കാൾ സുന്ദരമായ സ്ഥലം ലോകത്ത് എവിടെയെങ്കിലും കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടോ എന്ന് ചോദിക്കുന്ന നിരവധി ആളുകളോട് ഞാൻ പലപ്പോഴും തർക്കിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. കേരളത്തെക്കാൾ സുന്ദരമായ സ്ഥലങ്ങളിലൂടെ മാത്രമേ ഞാൻ സഞ്ചരിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളൂ എന്ന്. അപ്പൊ പ്രകൃതിയുടെ സൗന്ദര്യം മാത്രമല്ല ഇനി അങ്ങോട്ട് ടൂറിസത്തിന്റെ നിർണായകമായ ഒരു ഇൻഗ്രീഡിയന്റായി, ഒരു വിഭവമായി മാറാൻ പോകുന്നത്. വ്യത്യസ്തമായ അനുഭവങ്ങളുടെ മാത്രം ആകർഷണീയതയിലായിരിക്കും ഇനിയുള്ള കാലം ടൂറിസം മുന്നോട്ട് പോവുക. അപ്പോ പുതിയ കാലത്തെ ടൂറിസം ആക്ടിവിറ്റിയിൽ തീർച്ചയായും നമ്മുടെ ഗ്രാമീണ മേഖലയെ കൂടി പാർട്ടിസിപ്പേറ്റ് ചെയ്യിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഓരോ ഗ്രാമത്തിലെയും മനുഷ്യരുടെ ജീവിതത്തിന്റെ കൂടി ഒരവതരണമായി ടൂറിസത്തെ മാറ്റിക്കൊണ്ടുള്ള ഒരു പുതിയ കാല പദ്ധതി കേരളത്തിൽ രൂപപ്പെടുത്തേണ്ടതുണ്ട്. അതായത് കേരളത്തിലെ ഓരോ സാധാരണക്കാരൻ, ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞു ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷണൽ, നമുക്ക് 5 സ്റ്റാർ ഹോട്ടലുകൾ വേണം, ഏറ്റവും ആഡംബരത്വവും ഏറ്റവും ഗംഭീരവുമായ ആഢ്യത്വവും നിറഞ്ഞ റിസോർട്ടുകൾ ഉണ്ടാവണം, പൈതൃക ഗ്രാമങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാവണം, ഈ ഇൻഫ്രാസ്ട്രക്ചർ ഫെസിലിറ്റി ഉണ്ടാവണം, ഇതൊക്കെ ഒരു വശം നിൽക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ കേരളത്തിലെ ഓരോ ഗ്രാമത്തിലും ഓരോ മനുഷ്യർ ഓരോ കുടുംബത്തിലും ടൂറിസത്തിന്റെ പ്രതിഫലനം ഉണ്ടാവുന്ന പ്രവർത്തനത്തിലേക്ക് നമുക്ക് മാറ്റേണ്ടതുണ്ട്. കാരണം കേരളം പോലെ ഒരു ജനസമൂഹം ലോകത്ത് വേറൊന്നില്ല എന്നത് തന്നെ കാരണം. കേരളത്തിലേതുപോലെ ജീവിക്കുന്ന, കേരളത്തിലെ ഭക്ഷണ സ്വഭാവം പുലർത്തുന്ന, കേരളത്തിലെ ആചാരമര്യാദകൾ പുലർത്തുന്ന, കേരളത്തിലെ ജീവിത ശൈലികളെ കണ്ടെത്താൻ കഴിയുന്ന മറ്റൊരു ഭൂഭാഗം നമുക്ക് കണ്ടെത്താൻ കഴിയില്ല. എന്നാൽ കേരളത്തിലേതുപോലെ കായലുകളുള്ള, കേരളത്തിലേതുപോലെ ട്രോപ്പിക്കൽ വനങ്ങളുള്ള, കേരളത്തിലേതുപോലെ മലനിരകളും കടൽത്തീരങ്ങളുമുള്ള ഭൂപ്രദേശങ്ങൾ എത്രയോ ലോകത്ത് നമുക്ക് കണ്ടെത്താൻ കഴിയും. വ്യത്യസ്തമായി നിൽക്കുന്നത് നമ്മുടേതല്ലാത്ത ഒരു സംസ്കാരം, നമ്മുടേതല്ലാത്ത, നമ്മുടെ നാട്ടിൽ ലഭിക്കാത്ത ഒരു അനുഭവം തേടിയാണ് ഓരോ ടൂറിസ്റ്റും യാത്ര ചെയ്യുന്നത്. എന്റെ നാട്ടിൽ, എന്റെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ ഇതുവരെ കാണാത്ത പുതിയൊരു അനുഭവം മാത്രം തേടിയാണ് ഇനിയുള്ള ടൂറിസ്റ്റുകളെല്ലാം യാത്ര ചെയ്യുക. ഈ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ എന്താണെന്ന് കൊട്ടിഘോഷിക്കുക എന്നതാണ് സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയയുടെ കാലത്തെ ഓരോ ടൂറിസ്റ്റും ചെയ്യാൻ പോകുന്നത്. അതായത് സ്വന്തം മൊബൈൽ ഫോണുമായാണ് ഇന്ന് എല്ലാ ടൂറിസ്റ്റും യാത്ര ചെയ്യാൻ പോകുന്നത്. അവന്റെ ഏറ്റവും വലിയ ഹരം, ഞാൻ ഇത് അനുഭവിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്, ഞാൻ കണ്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. എനിക്ക് ചുറ്റും എന്നോടൊപ്പം യാത്ര ചെയ്യുന്ന നൂറുകണക്കിന് ആളുകളെ ഞാൻ കണ്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഒരാളും ഇന്ന് ഒരു സ്ഥലത്ത് ചെന്നാൽ അവിടുത്തെ സൗന്ദര്യമോ അവിടുത്തെ ജീവിതമോ ആസ്വദിക്കുക എന്നതിലപ്പുറം ആ കാണുന്നതും അനുഭവിക്കുന്നതും അപ്പോ തന്നെ ലോകവുമായി, അവന്റെ സൗഹൃദ വലയവുമായി ഷെയർ ചെയ്യുക എന്നതിന്റെ ആവേശത്തിലല്ല മനുഷ്യരും. ഇതാണ് പുതിയ തലമുറയുടെ ടൂറിസം സംസ്കാരം. അതിന് വളരാൻ പോകുന്ന ടൂറിസം സംസ്കാരമാണ്. അടുത്ത 10-15 വർഷം കൊണ്ട് അതായി മാറും ലോകത്തിന്റെ ടൂറിസം സംസ്കാരം. അപ്പോ അത്ഭുതങ്ങൾ തേടിയാണ് എല്ലാ മനുഷ്യരും യാത്ര ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അത്ഭുതം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ലോകാത്ഭുതം മാത്രമല്ല, ചെറിയ ചെറിയ അത്ഭുതങ്ങൾ, ജീവിതത്തിന്റെ വ്യത്യസ്തമായ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ. നമുക്കറിയാം, ഫേസ്ബുക്കിലെ പല പോസ്റ്റുകൾ നോക്കിയാൽ അറിയാം, കപ്പ പുഴുങ്ങിയതും മുളക് പൊട്ടിച്ചതും ഒരു പാത്രത്തിൽ വെച്ചിരിക്കുന്നതിന്റെ ഫോട്ടോ എടുത്ത് പോസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്താൽ ആയിരക്കണക്കിന് ആളുകൾ കാണും. അതിൽ എന്ത് അത്ഭുതം എന്ന് പരമ്പരാഗതമായി ചിന്തിക്കുന്ന ആളുകൾ ചോദിച്ചേക്കാം. പുതിയ തലമുറയെ അത് എക്സൈറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോ അടുപ്പിന്റെ തിണ്ണയിലിരുന്ന് അരകല്ലിൽ അരപ്പരച്ച് പരമ്പരാഗതമായി മീൻകറി ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്ന ആ പ്രോസസ്സ് അടുപ്പ് തിണ്ണയിലിരുന്ന് കാണാൻ കഴിയുന്ന ഒരു വിദേശിക്ക്, അവിടെ പാചകം ചെയ്തെടുക്കുന്ന വിഭവം അപ്പോൾ തന്നെ ചൂടോടെ ആസ്വദിക്കാൻ കഴിയുന്ന ഒരു വിദേശിക്ക്, ആ വീടിന്റെ ഔട്ട് ഹൗസിൽ താമസിച്ച് ആ ജീവിതത്തെ അടുത്തറിയാൻ കഴിയുന്ന ഒരു വിദേശിക്ക്, പകൽ സമയത്ത് അവിടെ നിന്നൊരു സൈക്കിൾ എടുത്ത് ഗ്രാമത്തിന്റെ ജീവിതങ്ങൾക്ക് തേടി പോകാൻ കഴിയുന്ന ഒരു വിദേശിക്ക്, ആ ഗ്രാമത്തിലെ റബ്ബർ ടാപ്പിങ്ങും മത്സ്യബന്ധനവും മത്സ്യബന്ധനക്കാരന്റെ ഒപ്പം വള്ളത്തിൽ വലയുമായി പോയി അനുഭവിക്കാൻ കഴിയുന്ന ഒരു വിദേശിക്ക്, അതായിരിക്കും അവന്റെ ജീവിതത്തിലെ ഏറ്റവും വലിയ എക്സൈറ്റ്മെന്റ്. അത്തരം എക്സൈറ്റ്മെന്റുകൾ തേടി ഇനിയുള്ള ആളുകൾ യാത്ര ചെയ്യാൻ പോകുന്ന കാലത്ത് കേരളത്തിൽ അനന്തമായ സാധ്യതകളുണ്ട്. കേരളത്തിന്റെ ഓരോ ഗ്രാമത്തിനും സാധ്യതകളുണ്ട്. ഇത്തരം അനുഭവങ്ങളിലൂടെ ഞാൻ നിരന്തരം സഞ്ചരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ് കഴിഞ്ഞ 20 വർഷങ്ങളായി. എത്യോപ്യയിലെ ദനാക്കിൽ ഡിപ്രഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ലോകത്തെ ഏറ്റവും താഴ്ന്ന ഉപ്പു മരുഭൂമിയിലൂടെ ഞാൻ സഞ്ചരിക്കുമ്പോൾ, ഞാൻ ദനാക്കിലെ ഗോത്ര ഗ്രാമത്തിലാണ് താമസിച്ചത്. ഒരു രാത്രി താമസിക്കാൻ അവിടെ 6000 രൂപയാണെന്ന് എന്നോട് പറഞ്ഞു. ബുക്ക് ചെയ്തു. അവിടെ ചെല്ലുമ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് കിട്ടിയത് ഒരു കയറ്റുകെട്ടിലാണ്. ആകാശത്തിന് കീഴെ ഈ ഗോത്രഗ്രാമം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഗ്രാമത്തിലെ മുറ്റത്തിട്ട് ഒരു കയറ്റുകെട്ടിൽ ആകാശം കണ്ട് നക്ഷത്രങ്ങളെ എണ്ണി അവിടുത്തെ രാത്രി ശബ്ദവും കേട്ടുകൊണ്ട് സുഖമായി പുതച്ച് കിടന്നുറങ്ങി. ആ ഒരു കട്ടിലിന്റെ വിലയാണ് 6000 രൂപ ഒരു രാത്രി. 100 കണക്കിന് ടൂറിസ്റ്റുകൾ അവിടെ വന്ന് താമസിക്കുന്നു ഈ മരുഭൂമി, ഉപ്പു മരുഭൂമിയിൽ ആകാശം കണ്ട് കിടന്നുറങ്ങാൻ. വ്യത്യസ്തതകൾ, ഞാൻ അനുഭവിക്കുന്ന ജീവിതത്തിൽ നിന്ന് വ്യത്യസ്തമായ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ, ഇത് തേടിയാണ് മനുഷ്യൻ യാത്ര ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അത്തരത്തിൽ യാത്ര ചെയ്യുന്ന ആളുകളെ ആകർഷിക്കാനും അവർക്ക് ആസ്വാദ്യമായ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ കൊടുക്കാനും കേരളം ഒരുങ്ങേണ്ടിയിരിക്കുന്നു. അതിലൂടെയാണ് കേരളം അത്ഭുതങ്ങളുടെ, ദൈവങ്ങളെക്കാൾ മികച്ച മനുഷ്യരുടെ നാടായി മാറുന്നത്. അതിനുള്ള ചിന്തകളുടെ ഒരു സമയം ആരംഭിക്കുകയാണ് എന്ന് മാത്രം സൂചിപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ വാക്കുകൾ നിർത്തുന്നു. നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം.
Thank you, Santhosh. I was about to ask you, I just read that that your next destination is in space.
Yes.
From Virgin Space, from Virgin intergalactic space.
Yeah. Their last test flight was a failure. Actually, their software had some problem with it, and I got a message yesterday that it was an unsuccessful test flight, but it will continue next week.
And it was very brave of you to take on a journey to space.
Yeah, someone should pioneer.
Good. I think now the point that you raised, a very important point, is Keralathinte Thanima.
Yes.
That is what we have, that is what we own, and that is what we can excel in. And if that Tanima is going to be transforming and memorable to travelers who come here, then we've got a very, very sustainable resource.
Definitely.
Yeah. So now, actually, as per my time schedule that we have, I think we are now open to questions that may come. In the meanwhile, we have a discussion among the panel. I just will refer to, I'm not touching upon many subjects that have come, as have been spoken. One, I should have spoken at the beginning. I'm a member or a member of a society called Tourism, Eco-Tourism Society of India, now renamed to Responsible Tourism Society of India. We have workshops. Our mandate is to have workshops across the country, especially far away in India. In the last workshop, I think that was sometime in the month of June 2019, pre-COVID time, we had a workshop in Goa, participated by very, very active, spirited young Goans. And their activism was very showing. And then I recall one of the speeches one youngster made, perhaps looking at some of me and some my colleague from Kerala was there. He said, "We in Goa laid out the red carpet, and the foreign direct investors came in, and they built our large hotels, 500, 300 room hotels, flying the best brands of the world. And then we looked across to our southern neighbor, and we saw in Kerala that those guys had put all the hurdles for the foreign direct investor to come. And they were afraid to come, thanks to, well, in a manner of speaking, thanks to red keeping Kerala green. But that aside, the point, what he said is that he revealed some statistics. Goa had a population of 14 lakhs, a tourist footfall of 64 lakhs. And I want to just put one point here. What he said is that we in Goa, the foreign direct investors have taken away the cream. I'm just quoting him, the way they perceive it, taken away the cream. And we Goans are left to clean up after the 64 lakh footfalls. We in Goa have got jobs as waiters and cooks and gardeners in the big 5-star hotels. And look at Kerala. They could not build the 5-star 500 hotels. They build the little things, most of them. And they are the owners and they are directing what happens there. It was comparing the two models which Goa represented and Kerala represented. I speak this in the context of our journey to God's own country. Unique and separate journey. Santhosh referred to our Tanima is what propels us. Karthik as a neighbor about the differences between Kerala and protected areas and wildlife. George, of course, very interestingly, global comparison. But this coming back to this Goan activist entrepreneur said we have got these jobs, and whereas in Kerala they have another position of small, and I repeat this word again as a model that what having prevented, or I'm not saying as a quality, having resulted in foreign investment failing to come at that stage, fail to come, local entrepreneurs did what they could, which is small, in a manner they knew which is local, and yet they made world class. And that's the Kerala story. And that story is what I think you heard our speakers from Santhosh, who's been a world traveler and now a space traveler. Karthik, who talks about the sustainability and the minimal impact that enterprise should make in a particular area. And George, of course, he Though I introduce him as the House of Muthoot, but he doesn't come here from that. But his passion to create unique, separate identity in the offering that he made. And this is the background that we have in our journey from Bimaru. Why Bimaru? At that time, I say that at Bimaru, in 1982, 1980 actually, our Kerala share in foreign tourism to India was 1.3% in 1982. And that has risen in 2014 and 2016 to 22%. It's been a spectacular growth from being, and what tourism, I would say, is not for the tourist. You can literally say, the hell with the tourist, the hell with the competitor. But tourism serves another purpose. And that purpose is very, very critical in the current context. The context being that our prime need today is how tourism can serve community, the jobs and livelihood that it can create, how tourism propels and motivates preservation of our culture and our heritage. All these is what tourism's purpose can be. With that, we've seen the journey, and today 1 in 3 new jobs comes from this sector. That's a significant number. In terms of contribution to GDP, we are about probably equal to the farm sector, to agriculture sector. As many people who are in agriculture are in tourism in Kerala. In the previous government, there was a summit which was by the name Emerging Kerala. The keynote address was delivered by the Chief Minister. There he identified two phenomena which were the change makers of Kerala. One, he said, was the phenomenon of the NRK, the non-resident Keralites. And the other next phenomenon, he said, was the phenomenon of tourism. And previous to this, there was a document called Vision for Kerala. And there the author of the document was then tourism minister at that time. He said that what Kerala lacks is a very serious lacuna there, lacks entrepreneurship. And if that can be overcome, we are on. But tourism has shown that entrepreneurship is very, very powerfully and alive in Kerala. The kind of unique models that Kerala has produced, creating small enterprises from Kerala's Tanima, from Kerala's own inherent qualities. So this is the journey that we've had from Bimaru to God's own country, to perhaps the most front-performing state, serving two things, community, and I would say that for various reasons, we could probably see we have been more green than most of the destinations for various factors. And one of those factors is the social alertness of what I would call the made in Kerala concerns, which we've had. Of course, there are many things that are wanting. And now with the COVID here, what is the new dawn? And that's a title of another talk, another program in our program for today, where the new dawn of Kerala, where our aspiration would be the cleanest, the greenest, and the healthiest, would be the direction that we want to move towards. We are now we are open to question and answers. If any of the panelists would like to supplement what they have to say or point out, reinforce, reiterate, most welcome. Yes, Karthik, I see that you are there, and after that, George. We have probably about another 7 minutes left.
Yeah. As I said, we need to put people in the center, okay, and it's the community where an enterprise is situated that has to finally benefit from it at any cost. The tourist today may be looking A, tomorrow B, tomorrow C. The community is going to stay. Community is not going anywhere. So that those fellows have to finally get it. And as I said earlier, in my earlier talk, uh, the client feels and identifies with you if your staff, if your community is getting served in the final sense. Okay, I tried it with a very small example. I had some people who were from Assam who were working here, and then I managed to get simple cloths woven by their wives far away. Okay, and then I wanted to see what is it that moves. The moment I shared it with the guest that it is woven by a lady somewhere far away, okay, who is probably not seeing her husband for 6 months in a year, but this is what she has sent, and that thing got sold before we could even think. Yeah. So similarly, it's how there's an emotional connect that any of our enterprise is managing to make with the guest, and that we need to really get on with it and make sure that stays, and that is really served warm to them.
George, I think the relevance, of course, your own enterprise, you're leading your group's tourism ventures in Kerala. I think you have different experiences there, and you now are able to benchmark it with your experience in Costa Rica. I think extremely useful will be for decision makers, planners in Kerala to see how, not as if we're importing a new idea from there, how an entrepreneur in Kerala faced what was the consequence of Kerala's story and what was the consequence of the Costa Rica story. I think it's very interesting for lessons that you've learned, and if there is any parallel, any kind of position that similarly Kerala can learn from and take.
I think I had mentioned that in my talk as well. I said there's a lot of synergies that are there that are lying unexploited between Costa Rica and Kerala. And I think when we see how the local communities there have developed into accepting tourism wholeheartedly as being part of their lives, I think the same thing when I was mentioning earlier was that we should have more people, more communities involved in how we look at taking tourism forward in Kerala as well. And I think that is very, very key. Everywhere, unfortunately, what I keep seeing is tourism lobbies. We see whether it's responsible tourism. We end up calling it tourism. We call it hospitality. If we can actually change our mindset to expand that and say we're going to include people from other sectors as well, vast communities of people who are outsiders as an audience or spectators watching what's happening in the tourism industry, rather than bring them in and make it more inclusive. I believe that will make a sea change in how we progress with what we call tourism or responsible tourism going forward. I think Goa was a perfect example, which you had given earlier, of how a destination can be destroyed if you do not carry local communities with you. Yes, there was large scale investment, large hotels that were built by people from outside, but that's not the only thing that's relevant. The relevance is what were local communities really wanting at that point in time when we talk about tourism. I mentioned earlier that Costa Rica was not developed by just entrepreneurs in Costa Rica, but it took an entire crowd of people from Europe and America, small entrepreneurs who actually created these beautiful enterprises there and actually brought about and spurred tourism in Costa Rica and the right form of tourism. But in the early 90s, they had a vision of what they wanted to do. I think it's the same thing. I think even today, we need that vision. We need to now progress to the next level of tourism in Kerala. And I think it starts from a very early stage in Kerala, where I'm going as far as grassroots education level to actually start talking about the curriculum in schools in Kerala, to actually talk about our own culture, our own language, our own traditions, our own values, bringing that in a bigger and a better light for people to start appreciating what we have here, and then saying, this is something that we need to preserve. This is something that we need to protect. It is the wealth that we have. The wealth is not to be counted in how much money you have or how big your business is or how global it is. It is to say the wealth that we have as a community. It's not just about the flora and fauna. I'm also talking about our ethics, our values, our integrity, all of these things, uncompromisingly Kerala. That's what we need to be. We need to say that if you are here, you're here because of all these things that we hold. The moment now today, Goa is a perfect example of where everything was actually compromised, where local communities had ended up doing the wrong things. Why does Goa now unfortunately have a reputation for prostitution, for drug dealing? You've left local communities to do nothing else but get into this. And they also claim there are mafias operating in various parts of Goa as well. Why has this happened? Has this happened with the agreement or the compromise made by local communities in terms of jobs that they could have gotten, in terms of things that they felt were the way of measuring wealth? And this is where I think we have to introspect and say, does Kerala measure itself by this alone? Now, I just end by another thing that you had said, that yes, we accounted for a very small percentage of tourists, and now we have much more, 22% or 23%. We've grown a lot. But the point I'm trying to make is, to what extent do we want to grow? Where is it that we cap it and we say, this is what the carrying capacity of Kerala is, and we cannot go beyond this? Because the earlier time I had also talked about the unbridled development that is happening in Kerala in the name of tourism, because we think the growth is so high, people are investing a lot of money into the wrong sorts of projects without the right ethos of what Kerala should be for. So this is where I feel that we need to come together as a community, not just a community of tourism or hospitality operators, as a community of peoples of Kerala, to say, we need to know how far we grow, what is it that we want from tourism, and how we get to that sustainable number rather than go in a very unsustainable manner.
Thank you, George. I think I'm getting a signal flashing over here saying that your time is up and we must close. Before I close, let me just say that I've also got information to say that at 3:30, that's about 15 minutes from now, the Chief Secretary of Kerala, Mr. Vishwas Mehta, he's going to speak on responsible tourism. That's apparently his PhD is on cultural tourism. So especially invite the tourism panel to come listen to him and maybe ask him some difficult questions. With that, let me again thank the panelists. We have, who's not on the screen, Santhosh George Kulangara, who's now probably the next news we hear from him that he's been to Mars. He's on a space trip. And we have Karthik, who's come from Bandipur, Karnataka, who's been a neighbor and observing, competing, complementing the Kerala's journey. And of course, George, from your own journey from, and I got the point that not to introduce you as coming from the house of Muthoot, but your passion to be in this field as part of creating your own unique, separate identity and purpose. Thank you, panelists. Let's hope that as a result of this, we can carry a message to the community and to the regulators.
Thank you.
With this, I'm closing this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Karthik.
And also, I have been reminded that, and thanks to Thangam Awards and End, who actually opened the session, and for her introduction to me, and then from her, I got the authority to introduce all of you and carry the session. Great, it's been a great session today. And Anandamani was one another strategist who put this together, and he's the one who we went through, who should be speaking from a large galaxy of speakers. We finally were able to come down to 2, 3. Thank you. And with that, my time is over, and let's close it, the event.
Thank you.